poor teacher rescued a sobbing girl after school without knowing his dad was a billionaire CEO who'd lost his wife. A still Thursday afternoon at Maplewood Kindergarten. The golden light of late autumn poured through the windows, casting warm shadows on the little chairs, cubbies, and craft-covered walls. Angela Evans, 26, hovered by the art corner. Watercolor palettes from the painting session that morning. Her loose honey blonde curls were fashioned loosely at the back of her head, her face radiating the peaceful pleasure of a woman who adored her craft. Outside, the majority of the parents had left their children. The customary post-class gossip had died away, all except for a tiny sound, a gentle sob. Angela turned fast and saw a small figure in the distant corner of the room, huddled over by the reading mat, party dress, and clutching a faded teddy bear to her chest. "Rosie," Angela cooed, moving towards her. The child did not even glance up. Her golden curls, braided into two pigtails, quivered as she quietly wept. Angela knelt down alongside her and rested a soothing hand on her shoulder. "Wrong, sweetie." Rosie sniffed, swiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. "Buquane Conroy," she whispered, eyes still cast downward, heart clenched. "Perhaps he's just late," she murmured. "Let's wait together, okay?" Rosie nodded infinitesimally, guided her into the teacher's lounge. A warm, peaceful room with bookshelves, a tiny couch, and a kettle humming softly in the corner. She filled a cup of warm milk into a child-sized mug and added a touch of honey. Rosie sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, still clutching her bear. Angela handed her the cup. "This always helped me feel better when I was little." "Did your daddy forget you?" Rosie asked, eyes wide. Angela smiled sadly. "No, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. It doesn't mean they don't love you." She sat down next to the girl and started humming a soft lullaby, stroking her hand over the child's soft curls. Gradually, Rosie's breathing steadied. Her eyes drifted shut. Outside, the clouds massed. In a few minutes, the first raindrops tapped lightly at the windows, then poured in thick sheets. The noise filled the still room, still and soothing. Time went by. The sky grew dark. Then scurried footsteps resounded in the hallway. Angela glanced up just as the door opened. A tall man stood in the doorway, soaked through with the rain. His black suit clung slightly to his figure. He appeared calm. His eyes roamed the room frantically until they fell upon the little figure sleeping soundly on the couch. "Rosie," he sighed, automatically stood up. The man stepped ahead. "Sorry I lost time." "No, a meeting overran." Angela then bestowed a courteous nod. "She's fine. Just a bit concerned, then exhausted." His gaze remained on his daughter, then shifted to Angela. "Thanks for keeping an eye on her," he said then, cold but not unpleasant. "Thanks." There was a moment's pause, then he followed with something, then almost as an afterthought. "I'm James." She knew the name. James Alden, CEO of Alden Motors, Billionaire. Reclusive. The man who'd become even more of an enigma after his wife's passing the previous year. "I'm Angela Evans," she answered softly. "I instruct Rosie's class." James nodded. He strode over and picked Rosie up from her playpen, taking care not to awaken her. She stretched slightly, her arms wrapping instinctively around his neck. Angela observed the gentleness of his movement, unexpected considering the guarded tone he possessed. As he turned to depart, he glanced over his shoulder once again. Angela stood by the couch, loose across her chest, her face soft. In the background, the rain surrounded her shape in pale gray illumination. Ross's little pink blanket remained draped over the cushion on which she had slept. James hesitated. His eyes locked with Angela's, were exchanged. Just a brief, exposed glance of quiet gratitude, confusion, and something else he could not define yet. He nodded once. La nodded in turn, and the door closed behind him, as if by itself. But in the silence that followed, the patter of rain still falling, and the warmth of a small girl's body still on the couch, something new had started to take hold, something that neither of them anticipated. James Alden was a man with many names. Visionary, genius, billionaire. Few knew the silent pain he bore behind those pen-sharp suits and boardroom stare. Since his wife died in a car crash 12 months ago, he had grown even more distant, his life contracting into a regimen of late nights, shut doors, and empty successes. To the world, he kept his cool, closed doors. He was disintegrating gradually. Rosie, who was just 3 when it occurred, for weeks before her little mind shielded herself with silence. Ever since, she had grown up largely under the charge of a changing team of nannies and chauffeurs. James believed this was best. He was unable to be both a father and a man on the brink of collapse. He tried loving her at arm's length. High-priced toys, top physicians, exclusive ballet lessons. But none of that restored light to her eyes, until she encountered Miss Angela. Saw the difference on a Tuesday morning. Rosie demanded to have a creased piece of paper tucked into her small backpack, protecting it like treasure. Her nanny reported she had spent the night coloring it. That night, James came home later than ever. As he came into Rosie's room, she displayed the paper with a brightness he hadn't seen in months. "It's for Miss Angela," she announced, her tone more vibrant than he had recalled. "Can I take it to her tomorrow?" James looked over the drawing. It was sloppy but understandable. 3 stick figures joined hands under a rainbow. One was marked me, one Miss Angela, and the third had a question mark. "She makes me happy," Rosie included. "Can I go early tomorrow, please?" James glared at her. Then he nodded. The next morning, he personally took her to school, a rare break in his schedule. He leaned against the classroom door, arms crossed, sunglasses concealing the wariness in his eyes. Angela Evans sat with a group of children inside, assisting them to stack the blocks. She glanced up when Rosie ran towards her. "Miss Angela, I drew something for you," Rosie yelled, her pink backpack shaking, smiled and took the drawing. "This is lovely, Rosie." "Is that me?" she inquired warmly. Rosie nodded, her pigtails shaking. "And who is this?" nodding toward the third figure. "That's my daddy," Rosie whispered. "But he's always busy." Angela's smile relaxed. She hugged Rosie hastily. James, who was still at the doorway, overheard all this. For an instant, something churned in his chest, his eye, and smiled. "Mr. Alden," she said, approaching him with a quiet presence that unnerved him in a way he couldn't define. "Rosie insisted," he replied. "She had something worth marking." "Well, I'm glad she did. She's quite the little artist," Angela said, automatically, already starting to turn to go. "Oh," she added. "This Saturday, we're having a class picnic." James elevated an eyebrow. "I don't normally go to school things." Angela smiled, surprised how much it would mean to them. Rosie gazed up at him with big, eager eyes. He hesitated. "I'll think about it," he grumbled. Saturday arrived sooner than he'd anticipated. He took too long deciding what to wear. He was late. But Roz's face broke into a smile the second she spotted him. And all at once he didn't care who saw him. Planning on holding a group activity in the shade of a great oak tree. She glowed in a plain sundress, her golden curls pulled half up. Rosie pulled him towards her. They sat on a picnic blanket, observing the children play. For a time, quiet comfortably rested between them, tripped and skinned her knee. She cried and ran into Angela's arms. Angela slowly cleaned off the dirt, holding Rosie tightly, were gentle but firm. "Your daddy loves you very, very much, Rosie." Sometimes grown-ups forget how to express it, but this does not imply that they do not feel it with all their heart. James was frozen. Those words, so plain, struck something very deep within him. He gazed at Angela, still holding his daughter in such care. It caused his throat to thicken. He glanced over to the side, feigning to see his phone, concealing the change in his face. Something in him had started to stir. A mild Saturday morning, when Maplewood Kindergarten had its picnic at the park by the lake. Sunshine seeped through the high trees, rang out over the green, and the aroma of new dough and paint, wafted through the air, came with their kids to spend the day playing outside, ring toss, painting ceramic animals, and the favorite station of them all, the cookie decorating table shaded under a giant oak tree. Angela Evans stood there, arms rolled up, a little one scoop, and shaped cookie dough into stars, animals, and hearts. Her golden curls were in a loose knot at her neck, her smile peaceful and reassuring as always. A familiar voice across the park. "Daddy, please help me," Rosie called. Alden by the hand, half, pulling him down the path to the cookie station. James looked unsure, out of his element in a relaxed environment such as this. He lingered behind the crowd, observing. Angela gazed up and smiled. "Mister," she said warmly. "You're just in time. We're missing one, head chef." She showed him a small apron with flour-dusted hands. "This is the official uniform today. Hope you're prepared." James laughed awkwardly, yet accepted it, putting it on over his starched polo. "I've never baked cookies before," he confessed. "First time for everything," Angela answered. "Rosie's a great teacher." They started rolling dough together, Rosie giggling as she molded hers into a crooked heart. She set it down on the tray gently. It fell from her hands and broke in two. Her smile disappeared. "I ruined it." Angela got down beside her and picked up the pieces gently. She murmured. She squished the heart back together and applied a little icing to fill in the crack. "You see this?" she whispered. "Sometimes what gets broken becomes that much more precious if we don't give up on them." Rose's eyes sparkled. "Really?" Angela nodded. James stood by, silent. Something in Angela's voice awakened something deep within him. Wordlessly, he took out a clear cookie bag and carefully put the mended heart inside. Then, picking up a purple marker, he wrote a single word on the label. Angela looked at the word, then up at him. Their eyes met. No words, just a shared moment that felt heavier than it should have. He gave her a small nod. She returned it, the corners of her mouth relaxing. Rosie clutched the bag as if it were treasure, her smile wide. "Thank you, Daddy." James leaned back and watched them both. Angela was not only a fine teacher. She was a person who knew how to fix things that were not so much broken on the outside. And for the first time, he felt something shift. Not in the world that existed outside him, but inside. It was not the cookie that brought him down. It was the silent awareness that perhaps, quite possibly, someone was assisting him in doing what no amount of success or wealth ever could. She was assisting him in mending his daughter's heart, and somehow his own. Something changed in Rosie after the picnic. She became more cheerier, warmer, more alive. Each day she talked about Miss Angela, what she was wearing, what she read, how she grinned when Rosie answered correctly. Her artwork was now filled with rainbows, hearts, and one recurring figure. A blonde woman with wavy, long hair. She started naming her dolls after Angela. James couldn't help but notice, naturally. How could he? Why not? He reassured himself that it was just a phase, a saccharine attachment that would pass. Deep down he knew better. One Wednesday morning, woke up with hot cheeks and bleary eyes. The nanny rang James at the office. She's developed a little fever. Nothing to worry about. She's not eating, and she refuses to take her medicine. James hurried home and sat on the side of Rosie's bed, bottle clutched in his hand. Come on, sweetheart. Just a spoon. Okay. She shook her head, whispering, only if Miss Angela approves. Frustrated but concerned, James phoned Angela. She answered immediately. Mr. Alden, it's James. He apologized. Rosie ill. I've tried everything. She will not take her medicine unless you say something. Angela stopped, then softly gave instructions over the telephone. But even as she talked, James could hear sniffling crying in the background. Daddy, please. Can Miss Angela come over? James hesitated. Exhaled. Angela, if you're not too busy, could you possibly come over for a little while? I'll be right there in 20 minutes. She showed up with a canvas tote, bag full of oranges, a small jar of honey, 2 homemade cookies, and Roz's favorite picture book. Her very presence appeared to bring down the child's fever. Sat up just enough to sip a full glass of warm lemon water and snuggle into Angela's lap. James stood in the kitchen doorway, speechless and amazed. Afterwards, as Rosie slept soundly asleep on the couch, breathing slowly and deeply, Angela got up and stretched slowly. I think she'll be all right. Just needs to rest. Thanks, James replied. Angela nodded. Where is the bathroom? Down the hall. Second door. She moved quietly, her footsteps light on the hardwood floor. But passing by a room where the door was ajar, she noticed something. She hesitated. Inside was James, no longer the strong, sharp-suited CEO. He sat alone in his study, slumped over a frayed leather notebook were scattered documents, framed portraits, and a dainty perfume bottle sitting unused. Angela took a step closer, was open. On its yellowed pages were dainty lines of handwriting. A woman's handwriting. His late wife's. Angela didn't intend to read. Her eyes caught a few underlined sentences. Rosie likes when James uses the Pooh Bear voice. If anything ever happens to me, let her know that I loved her every single day. James isn't great. He's the type of man who will fight for his child, with every breath in his body. Angela remained stone-statued. Her heart ached, not from sympathy, but from the staggering vulnerability of seeing something so intimate, so unadulterated. She didn't say a thing. She did not knock. Rather, she softly closed the door and left him in solitude with his sorrow. In the ensuing days, James appeared more frequently, hung around after school. He inquired more serious questions, not merely about Rosie's recovery, but about Angela's existence. One afternoon, he said, "You're so good with children. Did you ever desire your own?" Angela smiled gently. "I did. I lost my mom when I was 6. My father had brought me up on books and bedtime tales, but I had lacked the touch of a woman's hand. That was why I sought to be that for my students." James did not reply, but in his silence was understanding and admiration. Rosie, on the other hand, glowed. She sang more, danced more, laughed more. One night, as James drove her home from school, she leaned her head on his shoulder in the back seat and whispered, "Daddy, I wish Miss Angela was my mommy." a good-night kiss every night. James felt something inside of him break open. He did not say a word. He simply pulled her close, tightly, and gazed through the windshield as tears slowly filled his eyes. Not because of pain, not due to the past, because, for the first time, he saw a future. The warmth that had been consistently growing between Angela and James started to waver under the weight of his misgivings. He could not help it. He felt something. It was something more than gratitude or respect. It was the gentle comfort of being viewed in a manner he had not been for years. Presence was steady and soft, never demanding, never attempting to impress, but that only unsettled James more. He'd seen this before: attention, smiles becoming interviews, invitations becoming ambushes. Since he'd become James Alden, billionaire CEO. People regarded him as a headline, not a human being. With the death of his wife, the vultures descended. Reporters who pretended to be friends, who smiled too wide, too quickly. Angela wasn't like them. And yet the fear still persisted. What if he was mistaken once more? One night, he took her out for dinner, but not at his mansion, a family-style Italian restaurant on the outskirts of the city. Rosie had pleaded with him. Angela had consented in her usual grace. They sat at a table hidden in a corner. Rosie colored merrily between them with crayons. James observed as Angela assisted. His daughter drew a son wearing sunglasses. She had on a light blue blouse, her golden curls in loose. She was lovely, indeed, but it was her peace that charmed him. Yet the questions lingered. Rosie accompanied a waitress to the restroom to wash her hands. James leaned forward. "Miss Evans," he started. Angela looked up. She said softly, "I believe we've had enough cookies and sick days for you to drop the formality." He hesitated, then said. Angela blinked and then smiled weakly. "I know your name. I know what you do. People probably talk about you more than they listen to you." James gazed at her in surprise. She went on, gentle but firm. "All of that doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're Rosie's father. And I see a man attempting to be her hero. He is afraid that he is not enough. That's the man that I care about." He leaned back, surprised by her honesty. No flattery, no interest in his net worth, just the truth. It moved him more than he anticipated. But he kept himself in check. Old wounds are hard to close. A few days later, that distance was broken. It was nearing noon when Angela realized Rosie wasn't herself. The little girl was subdued, ashen, touching her crayons. Angela laid her hand gently on her forehead, and her heart sank, burning. Without hesitation, she picked up Rosie and hurried into the school office. She phoned James while the nurse attempted to assist her. Rosie whimpered and clung to her. This was not a slight fever. Angela didn't hesitate. She buckled Rosie into her car and raced to the closest children's hospital. James showed up 20 minutes later. His eyes swept the waiting room until he spotted them. Angela, sitting on a bench, holding Roz's sleeping body. Her arms folded the girl close. He rushed over. "What happened?" Angela gazed up, her voice cracking. She was on fire. "I couldn't help myself. Sorry I didn't ask. I had to." James didn't say anything. He sat next to her, his suit wet from the rain. Rosie was stable, in her arms. Angela gazed down. "I was afraid." And in that moment, James saw the truth. Not a teacher being a teacher. Not a woman flirting with him. Just a human who cared for his daughter with every fiber of her being. Fiercely, over slowly, and grasped her hand. No words, no sweeping gestures, just his hand, warm and firm, over hers. Angela glanced up at him, jolted by the touch, and in his eyes read what couldn't be said. Gratitude, trust, and the start of something true. It started with a click, photograph, taken behind a bush outside the city zoo. James, Angela, Rosie the little girl walking hand in hand, under the light of the disappearing sun. Rosie grasping a half-eaten cotton candy, in one hand, securely in Angela's. James had a stuffed panda. She won at a shooting gallery. It was simple, a snap after school outing, spontaneous and lovely, but the world had a different take. By morning, the cover was everywhere. Billionaire, CEO James Alden seen with mystery woman. She's a kindergarten teacher, sources claim. The pictures went viral. News sources speculated, questioned motives. Forums analyzed Angela's life. Who was she? Was she in it for money? Was it love or something contrived? Angela had never been in the limelight before, and she detested every minute of it. The following morning, the director called her to her office, were gentle but firm. "Angela, you've been a great teacher," the director said. "But we've received calls from agitated parents. There's concern regarding professionalism and image." Angela's throat constricted. "I never meant for this to occur." "We know, but perhaps take a brief leave just until things normalize." She nodded, swallowing hard to force a smile. "Of course." Later, in her car alone. Her hands shook. She didn't blame the school. She blamed herself for not setting a stronger boundary, for allowing her emotions to build up. Angela sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, humble and cozy. The room suited her. Low bookcases, paper flowers, a crayon drawing wall from her students. Notes read things such as, "Thank you for holding me when I cried, for making school happy." She smiled at them through blurred eyes. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. She opened the door. Stood James, soaked from the rain, his suit dripping, hair wet. He did not look as much like a CEO, but rather as a man coming apart, he said, voice. Angela blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the headlines," he whispered. "I saw what it did to you." Silently. He entered cautiously, eyes sweeping her house. The homemade ornaments, the soft colors, the lived-in calm, the opposite of his cold house. His eyes landed on a box marked letters. He opened it and read some. "Dear Miss Angela, we're my mommy too. Love, Riley." "Miss Angela, thanks for holding my hand. I'm not afraid of the dark any longer." He sat down, still clutching the notes. Angela stood there, arms crossed. Not defensive, just protected. "I didn't defend you," James whispered. "Let other people distort your image while I said nothing. I told myself I was doing it to protect Rosie. But in reality, I was afraid. You'd be like everybody else." She looked him in the eyes, and now he stood up and walked towards her. "I was mistaken." The rain pattered relentlessly on the windows as he moved closer. His face was wary, not with sleep deprivation, but with shouldering too much, for too long. "You're more than someone Rosie loves. You're not a myth. You're the woman who injected laughter back into my daughter's life and made me feel again what it means to hope." Angela's breath caught. James turned around toward the door. He opened it, admitting wind and rain. But before he stepped out, he glanced back. "I should have trusted you," he said. "I should have stood with you." Then he stepped out into the downpour, followed barefoot under the awning, observing him standing in the rain. "James," she called. He turned around. She said softly. He smiled warily. "Some things," he said, "are worth getting wet for." Angela's return to Maplewood Kindergarten was subdued. But the greeting she got was far from it. As she walked through the gates, children sprinted toward her legs, their happy voices smiling at her over each other. Parents came up with smiles and affectionate words. "We missed you. My daughter cried every night when you left. Never leave us again." Angela blinked back tears. The spot that she was so scared might turn her away had embraced her instead like family. The next parent-teacher meeting, the room fell silent when James rose up. He smoothed his jacket and faced the group, not as a CEO, but as a dad. "I'd like to say something," he started, his voice firm but genuine. "There were rumors lately, and I remained quiet longer than I ought to. Quiet cost someone I love dearly." He looked at Angela, who sat quietly at the back. "Miss Evans has done more than teach. She's been a beacon in my daughter's life and mine. I owe her a public apology and my utmost gratitude." The room was still for a moment, erupted, hesitant at first, then complete. Angela smiled, a silent nod of appreciation passing between them in the room. Their first real date arrived soon after that. It was no big deal, merely dinner at a small bistro nestled between used bookstores, the sort of establishment you'd bypass if you weren't specifically searching for it. One candle burned on the table in front of them. The window, rain beat gently against the panes. They discussed everything and nothing. Angela shared stories of scraped knees from childhood and library exploits. James described designing toy robots in his garage long before tech investors had ever heard his name. For the first time in years, he was laughing. Not to be polite, but from a place that hadn't felt joy in far too long. When they walked outside into the cool evening air, held out his coat. Angela accepted it silently, their hands touching as she tugged it over her shoulders. It was a tiny moment, but one that felt like something falling into position. A few days afterwards, Rosie presented them with a drawing she had done at school. Crayon lines, 3 figures stood under a rainbow, Rosie in the center, with James and Angela holding her hands. Written above them, "Family." James stood holding the paper for a very long time, his throat constricting. That evening, Angela put Rosie to bed during a slumber party at the Aldens' house. The child gazed up and whispered, "Good night, Mommy." Angela froze, smiled drowsily, eyes half shut. "Can I call you that?" Angela's eyes swelled with tears. She nodded, a kiss on Rosie's forehead. In the doorway, James stood silently. Later, as they sat together in the still living room, James reached out and took her hand. "I never thought I'd love again," he whispered. "Not after everything. But then you came into our lives quietly, and suddenly everything was possible once more." Angela rested her head on his shoulder. "I didn't have any of this planned either, but now I couldn't live without it." Outside, the stars twinkled softly overhead. Inside, 2 hearts began to beat a little closer. In the room next door, a little girl slept under her rainbow drawing, safe, loved, and finally home. Rosie's kindergarten graduation, morning unfurled with pale sunbeams, and the hum of beaming parents in the school garden. Of every color danced around the stage, and lines of chairs covered the lawn. Small blue caps and gowns were worn by the children, who giggled as they struggled to maintain line. Angela stood near the stage, clipboard clutched in her hand, keeping everything running efficiently. Her golden curls were clipped smiling gently in the back, and she had on a pale peach colored dress. Rosie chose because it resembles sunshine. James came early, in a plain charcoal suit and no tie. He greeted a couple of parents, nodded to the principal, his attention remained on Angela. As the ceremony commenced, Tender tears fell. Children sang, laughed, received their certificates with big smiles. Rosie, naturally, took the limelight when she read her poem and finished up, "Thank you, Miss Angela, for being my teacher and my favorite grown-up." Laughter and hearty applause ensued. The principal then came back to the microphone. "We close," she said. "One of our parents would like to make a few comments." James walked up onto the little wooden platform. The sun shone his face, revealing a flicker of nervousness. He took a slow breath and looked out at the crowd, then straight at Angela. "My daughter Rosie," he began, "lost her mom when she was 3. I thought the best way to protect her was to build walls, keep the world out, guard my heart. But someone came along who didn't only instruct Rosie in the alphabet or tying her shoes. She instructed her in trusting again." He hesitated, voice softer now, "and unwittingly, she taught me as well." The crowd fell silent. Angela's eyes widened. Rosie sat in the front row, bouncing, eyes fixed on her father. James moved away from the microphone and proceeded toward Angela, standing at the side of the stage. "What love might be like after loss," he went on. "I did not think I'd ever be brave enough to risk it again." In front of dozens of parents, teachers, and children, he stopped into his pocket and knelt down on one knee. Gasps erupted in Thagarden. He said, emotion heavy in his voice, "You taught my daughter how to love with all her heart. Would you do the same for me for the rest of my life?" Angela's hand shot to her mouth as tears sprang in her eyes. She nodded once, twice. "Yes." There was applause. Rosie squealed with excitement and ran up to throw her arms around Angela from behind, tightly. "Mommy Angela," she laughed. Angela turned and knelt to hug her, tears dripping freely. James knelt with them, wrapped around both, forehead against Angela's in gentle contact. It was not a perfect time. It was better. It was true. It was deserved. Family. 1 year on, in the very same old oak tree in the school garden, a small wedding ceremony was held. Down a short way lined with paper flowers, her dress plain, beautiful. Rosie carried the bouquet, smiling from ear to ear. The attendees included children, parents, and teachers, individuals who had seen this love blossom from silent origins, stood under a wooden doorway, never taking his eyes off hers. Their promises were gentle, filled with hesitation, truth, and optimism. From tragedy, James confessed, his voice shaking, "You guided me through the process of finding my way back to love." Shared a kiss as the children applauded, and Rosie, now 5, held high between them, scattering petals in the air like confetti. When the sun started to go down, the 3 of them strolled hand in hand through the garden. Rosie skipped between them, swinging their hands in delight. Angela glanced down at her, and then up at James, who smiled like a man at last at peace, and at Rosie, as air, full of laughs, spinning in the grass. A little girl waltzing between her mother and father beneath a sky that at last felt whole. Thank you for accompanying us on this moving journey of love and healing. If this touched your heart, please like, comment, share it with someone who still believes in love after loss. For more moving stories that warm your soul, to subscribe and give that hype button to support soul-stirring stories. Your support means the world to us. It keeps the stories going and the hearts connected. Until next time, take care, love deeply, and never stop believing in real connection. Soul-stirring stories, stories that heal, stories that last. Blind date turned job interview. The poor girl sat across her future boss,